So this week in the gym was really light, very simple. It's really all I could tolerate this week. I've been feeling it from exams, and so this week I just tried to get my body kind of up and moving. And so this week I really wanted to focus on just walking and making sure that my body was getting up and moving, and at least just trying to get my heart rate up a little bit. And you can manipulate that by just walking a little bit faster. And so because of that, I was just trying to keep at a good pace and just making sure that I was getting about 30 minutes in for 3 days this week. Just making sure that I was getting muscles moving and getting my heart pumping, which heart rate and stroke volume obviously equals cardiac output. And so the more your body is just trying to get blood to those muscles and oxygen to those muscles, so that way the oxygen can be used in the ETC, which is part of oxidative phosphorylation, which occurs in the mitochondria. And so it's super important that those muscles get adequate oxygen. Otherwise, you end up not being able to keep up a work rate. You end up with a lot of fatigue because your body will be in anaerobic, like bioenergetics. So it's super important that you get good oxygen from the blood to the muscles. And so because of that, you end up like your body's trying to increase our cardiac output, which is affected by your heart rate and stroke volume. Your heart rate is affected by your parasympathetic nervous system and your sympathetic nervous system. The vagus nerve is part of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is trying to slow your heart rate down, and it sends IPSP muscle signals to the heart in order to slow your heart rate down. The accelerator nerve is part of your sympathetic nervous system, and it does exactly what it sounds like. It sends EPSP muscle signals, and it causes your heart to contract faster. The heart spontaneously depolarizes at the SA node, and so it doesn't need the neural input that we get from that's similar to like muscles. It can just spontaneously depolarize at ideally about 100 beats per minute. And so it then trickles down. You have electrically dead cells in your valves and everything, so that way that SA node just kind of stops at the atria. That way your atria can contract and send it into the ventricles. The AV node will end up depolarizing, and the SA node will repolarize. And the AV node just kind of sends a slower signal down, and it will send it down the bundle of His into the right and left bundle branches. That's going to contract the septum, but it's not going to do anything on the ventricles. And then it's going to send it up the Purkinje fibers after it hits the apex of the heart. And so once it goes up the Purkinje fibers, the ventricles will contract and it will send blood out of the heart. The right ventricle will send it to the pulmonary artery, so that way your oxygen can end up attaching to the hemoglobin, which is super important again, so that way your body can get adequate oxygen. And then you end up having it come back through the pulmonary vein, and it will go into the left atria, and then you'll end up going through all of that electrical activity again, and then you'll end up in the left ventricle. The left ventricle will contract in order to send it out of your aorta. The aorta will go into the arterioles and then into the capillaries, where the gas exchange, nutrient exchange, all of that occurs in the capillaries. And so you're able to end up like just being able to get adequate oxygen. It then goes through the venules and the veins, back through the inferior and superior vena cava, back into the right atrium. So that way the process can happen all over again. So that way you're still getting adequate perfusion. And then stroke volume is affected by preload, contractility, and afterload. Preload is going to be your like passive filling of the heart. And then greater this stretch, the greater the squeeze, is the Frank Starling mechanism of the heart. And then you have contractility, which is just the heart's ability to contract. And then afterload is the back pressure against the aortic valve. So if you have higher afterload, you're going to end up having lower stroke volume. Whereas if you have lower afterload, you're going to have less stroke volume or you're going to have increased stroke volume, because if there's more back pressure against the aortic valve, there's not as much blood coming out into the aorta. So it's super, super important that you're able to keep those two things kind of in line, so that way your cardiac output can be good. Otherwise, you can pass out, especially if you're not getting adequate oxygen perfusion, especially to the brain. You have the baroreceptors and chemoreceptors. Your chemoreceptors are inside of your carotid arteries, and they basically just help to make sure that your body is seeing how much your chemicals are. Your baroreceptors really help to take care of your heart rate while you're working out. And so I was thinking about that and the mind-body connection to the cardiac system.